everyone, I'm Meredith, and listen, I'm just a girl, still stuck in her apartment, still looking for more people, that's right, more people to talk to. So my guest today is Chris Brito. He's a podcaster and a journalist and the co-host and co-creator of the All Hoops podcast. They cover the NBA and especially the New York Knicks. So we're talking all things professional sports in our post-pandemic world. But before we get into all of that, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Let's Talk About It YouTube channel. I don't want you missing when new episodes come out. And make sure when you do, when you hit subscribe, you also hit the like button. So go ahead, like and subscribe. Chris and I will wait. Did you do it? Okay, great. Chris, welcome. Let's talk about it.
Meredith, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Now, before you and I get started, I just want to remind all of our viewers and listeners and subscribers, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Let's Talk About It YouTube channel. You'll never miss an episode. That way you'll always get notifications. Okay, now that I've gone through all of that, Chris, the NBA season, where are we in this post-pandemic sports world? You're talking to someone that is a little clueless, sports in general, NBA, basketball, no exception. So the expert here, all hoops. Where are we?
Okay, so you actually caught me in a very, what a lot of fans and people who cover the sport in one of the most fun times, because it's the off season. And normally you'd think it's like very quiet, but Monday, August 2nd, is the beginning of free agency. So typically a lot of the players who aren't signed yet, they go to new teams. And so the Knicks happen to be one of the teams with the most money, and they actually have more than $50 million to spend. So in short, they can attract some of the better players on the market, right? Mm-hmm. Normally, this is like a crazy part of the season because a lot of the big name free agents like switch destinations. So, for example, Kevin Durant a few years ago decided to go to the Brooklyn Nets, and it was during this time. And so did Kawhi Leonard, a great player on the Clippers from LA. And in terms of the sport overall, in relation to the pandemic, it was a crazy year in the sense that the year started off only a few weeks after the last season finished. So there was a lot of talk of the players being at a higher risk of injury because, players have their conditioning and all these things that they do in the off season in order to keep producing at a high level, right? And so the amount of time wasn't as much as it usually is. Mm-hmm. And anyway, and in these playoffs, which finished a few weeks ago, we saw a lot of injuries to a lot of key players, right? You had LeBron James injured for a while. You had Anthony Davis, another marquee NBA player. You saw James Harden and Kyrie Irving injured as well. So a lot of these different guys went down, and it was like over 10 players who had like one of these all-star players, right? Like they had these injuries that injuries are not uncommon in professional sports. But it's the
change in schedule after the pandemic, or not after the pandemic, but because of all the change in the seasons.
Right. And the other thing too, during the season, there was less time for rest as well. So all of this, it's hard to point to one thing, but if that's the only thing that changed and it created this amount of injuries, it can't always be a coincidence. But anyway, we just finished a very exciting season. We had Giannis, a player from Greece who overcame poverty and is now an NBA champion. So it's been it's been a year impacted by COVID, but it was a very fun year where an unexpected team really took the trophy. So
now, as a Knicks fan, podcaster, consumer, take me back just a little bit. Do you remember the last game before COVID hit, March 2020, that you went to? And what was now the first game that you've been back to in person in the stadium?
So the last game that I went to was actually maybe the season before that, and it was an anniversary gift from my girlfriend. And obviously, I love being in the stands and whatnot. And unfortunately, the season once it opened to fans, I never got around to going to a
Mm.
game, and it haunted me. And when the playoffs kicked around, I was looking to buy some tickets for the playoffs, but let's just say it was a lot of money. It was like over like $300 for nosebleed. It's like I couldn't rationalize that. But it was a great time at the bar. So
Right. And then what's the first game you've been back to, or have you gotten back into the stands yet since it's been reopened to fans?
so I went to a Mets game 2 weeks ago, or no, last week, and that was a lot of fun. The idea of being with a lot of people still is like it's a little bit shocking to me still. The pandemic is still clearly in the minds of at least me, and I assume a lot of more people. I'm vaccinated, but you know, can we really trust the person that's next to us? I think that's the big question that I think many of us are asking ourselves when we go to these big name events. Um, I mean, would you feel comfortable in a concert with a lot of people? I don't know. It's one of those things where I think I'm still trying to get used to, but luckily there was really nobody next to me at the game.
Okay. So have you been back to a Knicks game though?
No, not yet. Not yet. But I certainly plan on going to multiple games when the season comes around.
And talk to me about, I guess, from your Mets um, game perspective and how that will apply next season to the Knicks. What's the difference now being in a stadium? I haven't been to. It's been a long time since I've been to a sports game. What's a game? It's not a sports game, right?
Yeah. No, I hear you.
What's the difference now with different post-pandemic protocols, occupancy, I guess obviously mask wearing? What's the difference for fans?
So I think right now with baseball, it's a little bit back to what it normally was before the pandemic. And in terms of basketball games, I know that when the Knicks playoffs were around, when they started letting more people in, they were allowing fans who were vaccinated to fill a large portion of the stadium. I'm not sure if it was full capacity, but it was certainly close. I believe it was close to it. And I know that like even during the season right before, it was only at 10% because that's what Cuomo allowed at the time. I'm expecting if things improve by the time it's October, November, I think we'll start to see the stands completely full. But it's hard to imagine those situations without like, at least wearing a face mask. But I guess we'll see when the time comes. With the Delta variant and everything, like who's to say that things will go back to normal?
Right. When you went to the Mets game, did you have to were masks required?
No. I mean, I didn't. At least I didn't wear one, and nobody around me did.
Right.
I went with my family, so it was comfortable. And like I was mentioning earlier, I had no one next to me, so there was and it's obviously open air, so that makes a lot makes things more comfortable.
So it's likely though that the NBA and being inside with basketball for fans, you might have to wear a mask. How do you think that's going to affect the overall feeling, of being at a game, the fanfare, if you will, how fans
Yeah.
does it change how fans can support players?
Yeah, if I'm being honest, I think if I'm a fan at a Knicks game and I assume things are okay in terms of COVID, people aren't going to wear masks, I think, unless it's forced, right? And I think it's obviously less fun when you're wearing a face mask in your face. You can't cheer as loud, you can't yell as loud, you can't say vulgar language as loud. So it's just, I I anticipate fans will not be happy about wearing face masks. It's one of those things where you know, you want to be a fan and that's all you care about.
Right.
You're not really thinking about these other things. So
How do you think it changes it for players? Have you gotten within All Hoops to speak to, anybody on the court, how it feels for them to either be playing without fans in the stands or if they are masked?
mhm. So in my professional life, I've talked to some players, and the general sense that I get is that it's just one of those things where like you have to accept the reality. And that was, that was a few months ago when, the vaccine was still being rolled out and there was still like this cloud over the fans coming back into the games. And then, you know, just as we've gotten closer to, you know, higher numbers of people being vaccinated, there is a little bit more comfortability in the stands. You can just tell. The one thing that I mean, you've even seen like raunchy fans like throw things at players, like, you know, um, I'd say for the most part, I think all the players welcome it. I mean, um, and if you look at what's happening in the Olympics, right? You know, players like athletes like Simone Biles have pointed out that like she misses not having people in the stands, and like that includes her family, which could be a factor in what's going on with her right now too.
Mhm. What are other post-pandemic issues that the NBA as well as professional sports are going to have to reckon with, or they're still trying, to figure out?
I think one of the big things to look at is like the conversations around vaccine passports, right? I think a lot of the talk has been in Europe about that stuff, and like the governments there have made it a point that you can't enter certain facilities without it. I wonder how, depending on what happens with the Delta variant, like I wonder how much or whether we will do something similar. So that's one. And then B, on some level, it's this idea of like I obviously don't want to call for it, but if we end up having a shutdown again and we're going through this all over again, like, can we really trust the person that's next to us when we're at a game where we're supposed to forget about all our worries? So
Mhm.
those are like the two of the biggest things that I think of in relation to COVID. And in terms of athletes, you see it happening now with football. You have players who are not vaccinated and because of some new NFL rules, if there is a breakout on a team in terms of a COVID breakout and the unvaccinated players are among that group, that team could forfeit a loss. So there are only what,
Isn't there a
17?
big monetary loss in that too that I read about? Like the losing team, that team would then have to like pay out some big amount.
I'm not
Again,
sure about I'm not sure about
I bring
I
you the
mean
expert.
I'm not sure about I think there is the expectation that you'll lose money because if you can't suit up, you're losing on TV rights. And we both work in the TV industry or worked, and you know how important ratings are, and NFL is king when it comes to that.
Mhm.
So just one game, just forfeiting one game, you forfeit all that loss. And what do you do to replace it? There's nothing on TV that could replace the way an NFL game can. So imagine if it's a marquee game, then you're really screwed.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then in relation to the NFL thing, um, then you'll have the players who are vaccinated potentially blame the ones who aren't unvaccinated. So, these are the type of conflicts that I see arising in the next few months because the NFL season's like right around the corner. Preseason starts in like 2 or 3 weeks.
We're seeing more and more industries require vaccination or regular testing. Broadway just did it for audience members.
Mhm.
Do you see professional sports going that way?
In terms of fans or in terms of the athletes?
I mean, that's kind of a question, in general for these industries. Um,
Mhm. I mean, the players, for so for players, they actually, so like for example, the NFL, right? Like the unvaccinated players would have to go like routine testing, whereas the vaccinated players don't have to.
Right.
So that it's something already being implemented, and even during the NFL and NBA seasons that just passed, like they were doing routine testing. And like one of the cool things that I think, since I follow the NBA pretty closely, is that they give you, when the regular season was going on, they gave you updates of how many players tested positive or tested positive for COVID.
Oh, you name?
So like they don't name them because I believe that's a HIPAA violation.
See issues.
But for example, you'll have like it'll read like out of the 398 players, 2 tested positive, and you usually have a good idea of who it is. But I think that's like a good way of like being accountable, you know.
Mm-hmm. How does it feel now to have your sport back? You know, as a consumer, as a fan,
I love it.
podcaster. I mean, that must have been really awful. I mean, sports is such a community-based, form of entertainment activity, if you will. To have it gone for so long and now have it back, what's that been like?
Oh, I mean, so I'll be honest with you. Last year, when the last basketball game that I saw in a while, and then there was the NBA was brought back, but in a bubble in Florida, and truthfully, it just, I love basketball, and so watching players do what they love again, and just see them out on the floor, like, and it was kind of cool because they gave games at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon and like games until like in the evening. And so that's different than when it usually is, because most games usually start at 7 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that whole experience of watching basketball in the bubble was such a fun time. And even this season that was quote unquote more normal was, I mean, I think I saw most of the playoff games, like maybe out of the 60 or 70 plus games, I probably saw like 90% of them. But the best reason was because my team, the Knicks, was in the playoffs. I mean, they didn't do very well, but it was just such a happy time.
Yeah. What was it like when we were in the shutdown from the pandemic?
In terms of basketball, without basketball, I was reading books about basketball. I mean, I had to get my fix.
It sounds bleak.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading this one book about Kevin Durant and his time in the Golden State Warriors, and I was like, oh my God, this is so interesting. But it was just because it was just like the lack of basketball content was getting to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I bought a book today, so I'm into the basketball book stuff. So
you'll have your balance.
Yeah, you gotta have your balance. Yeah.
As the season
definitely
starts up again soon. What are you going to be covering next week and in the weeks to come on All Hoops?
So our main focus is the off season for the Knicks. The Knicks, just as I mentioned earlier, the Knicks just made the playoffs. They weren't expected to make the playoffs, so right now they're just building on the team that they have. And so this summer is where we're going to see them add a lot of pieces, hopefully pieces that will really make a difference on this team.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, don't stop what you're doing. Subscribe to Chris's podcast, All Hoops. If you're a basketball person or like me and need to get up to speed with basketball, you are the guys to listen to.
Thank you.
Absolutely. What you guys have new episodes every Monday?
We usually have one every week. Our most recent episode was the one on free agency. We're just covering what potential targets are for the Knicks and their most recent draft picks.
Absolutely. Well, don't forget to subscribe to All Hoops. And Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Meredith.
Don't forget also, like and subscribe to the Let's Talk About It YouTube channel. You'll never miss an episode that way. And this has been Let's Talk About It for now. We'll talk to you next time.